Every day, billions of people perform the same tiny ritual. They wake up, sit down, and put their feet into a pair of shoes. We rarely think about it. But imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that shoes had never been invented. No sneakers, no boots, no sandals, no high heels, no football boots. Just your bare feet against concrete, gravel, hot sand, frozen ground, and everything else the world could throw at them. For most of human history, that was reality. And then, somewhere in the distant past, someone had a simple idea. Put something between the foot and the ground. It sounds almost too obvious to be an invention. But that decision would eventually produce some of the most complicated objects we wear today. Because the history of the shoe is not really the history of leather, rubber, or laces. It is the story of how a simple tool for survival became a symbol of wealth, fashion, sport, technology, and identity. And the strangest part is that we don't actually know who invented the first shoe. The reason is simple. Shoes are terrible at surviving history. The materials early humans used, animal hide, bark, grass, and plant fibers, usually decay long before bones or stone tools do. So archaeologists have had to reconstruct the story from fragments, impressions, and remarkably well-preserved exceptions. The oldest directly dated footwear known today comes from Fort Rock Cave in Oregon. These sandals are more than 10,000 years old. They were made from woven sagebrush bark and other plant fibers, forming a surprisingly sophisticated sole and foot covering. But even these may not represent the beginning. Scientists have discovered footprints in South Africa that may have been made by people wearing some kind of footwear as far back as 150,000 years ago. The evidence is controversial because there is no shoe attached to those footprints. Only the tracks remain, and that leaves us with a fascinating possibility. The first shoes may have disappeared tens of thousands of years before the first pair was ever preserved. But why did humans need them? The answer begins with the weakness of the human foot. Our feet are extraordinarily good at walking and running, but unlike many animals, they are not protected by hooves or thick pads. Bare skin has to deal directly with sharp rocks, thorns, freezing temperatures, and scorching surfaces. As humans migrated into different environments, protecting those feet became increasingly important. In cold regions, footwear could provide insulation. In rough terrain, it could prevent cuts and injuries. And over long journeys, even a small amount of protection could make an enormous difference. One of the greatest pieces of evidence comes from a man who died more than 5,000 years ago. We know him as Ötzi the Iceman. When his naturally preserved body was discovered in the Alps, he was still wearing footwear, and it was remarkably clever. His shoes combined several materials. The outer parts used animal hide. The soles were designed for contact with rough ground. Inside, a network of plant fibers and dry grass provided insulation. In other words, Ötzi was wearing a primitive cold-weather boot. Not a fashionable one, not an athletic one, just one designed to keep him alive. And that was the original purpose of the shoe, survival. But as human societies became more complex, footwear began to become something more. It began to communicate. Ancient civilizations developed their own styles of sandals, boots, and shoes according to climate, occupation, and social position. In hot regions, open sandals allowed air to circulate around the feet. In colder environments, enclosed footwear offered protection. And in armies, footwear became part of military technology. The Romans, for example, developed the famous Caligae. It was a heavy leather military sandal designed for marching. The sole could contain numerous iron studs, giving soldiers traction on rough and muddy ground. The shoe was no longer simply something between the foot and the earth. It was becoming equipment. And then something unexpected happened. Shoes became a way of showing people who you were. During the Middle Ages, Wealthy Europeans could wear elaborate footwear that had little to do with practicality. One famous example was the Poulaine. These shoes could have extraordinarily long, pointed toes. The longer and more extravagant the shoe, the more impractical it became. And that was part of the point. If you could afford to wear a shoe that made walking difficult, you were effectively announcing that you didn't spend your life doing difficult physical work. Footwear had become a status symbol. But there was another problem. For centuries, shoes were uncomfortable. One reason was that many shoes were made as straights. There was no dedicated left shoe and right shoe. The two were essentially identical. You simply wore them until they gradually adapted to your feet. Imagine buying a new pair of sneakers today and discovering that both shoes were exactly the same shape. That was normal for much of history, and there was another limitation. Every shoe had to be made by hand. A shoemaker had to cut the leather, shape it, stitch it, and attach it to the sole. A pair of shoes was not a disposable purchase. It was craftsmanship. Then the Industrial Revolution began changing almost everything. Machines started entering the shoemaking process. One of the most important breakthroughs came from Ernst Matzeliger, an inventor whose lasting machine could mechanically position and attach leather uppers to shoe soles. The effect was enormous. Shoemaking could become faster, more consistent, and cheaper. Shoes that had once required skilled hand labor could now be produced on a much larger scale. And once shoes became affordable to ordinary people, footwear stopped being something reserved primarily for the wealthy. It became an everyday consumer product. But another invention was about to change shoes even more dramatically: rubber. In the 19th century, Charles Goodyear developed vulcanization, a process that made natural rubber far more durable and stable. Eventually, rubber could be combined with canvas to create lightweight shoes with flexible soles. They were quiet. So quiet that people began calling them sneakers. The name captured something completely new. A shoe didn't have to be heavy leather equipment anymore. It could be light, flexible, quiet, and eventually fast. As organized sports exploded in the 19th and 20th centuries, shoes began evolving specifically for athletic performance. Running shoes, football boots, basketball shoes, tennis shoes. Each sport demanded something different: grip, flexibility, protection, speed. And manufacturers began experimenting with materials and shapes designed around the human foot in motion. One famous example came from a deceptively ordinary kitchen appliance. In the early 1970s, track coach Bill Bowerman was searching for a better sole for running shoes. He looked at a Waffle iron and wondered whether its grid pattern could create a better grip. So he experimented with rubber. The result helped inspire a new generation of running shoe soles. It was a strange idea. A Waffle iron had helped influence the evolution of athletic footwear. And this is where the history of shoes takes another dramatic turn. Shoes stopped merely protecting athletes. They started trying to make them better. Cushioning systems absorbed impact. Specialized soles improved traction. Lightweight synthetic materials reduced weight. And companies began turning technological innovation into something people wanted to wear even when they weren't exercising. The sneaker escaped the sports field. It entered everyday culture. By the late 20th century, a shoe could be associated with a musician, an athlete, a neighborhood, a fashion movement, or an entire generation. The basketball sneaker became especially powerful. When Michael Jordan entered the NBA in the 1980s, his signature footwear helped transform the athletic shoe into a cultural phenomenon. People weren't buying certain sneakers because they planned to play basketball. They were buying them because the shoes represented something: success, style, youth, sport, identity. The shoe had come a very long way from a piece of bark wrapped around a prehistoric foot. And then footwear went somewhere even stranger: the moon. In 1969, astronauts walking on the lunar surface needed footwear capable of handling an environment unlike anything humans had experienced before. Their boots had to protect them from extreme temperatures, abrasive lunar dust, and the mechanical demands of walking in reduced gravity. And when the astronauts left the moon, some of those outer boots were left behind. A simple object that had begun as protection from stones and thorns had become part of humanity's first journey to another world. But perhaps the most interesting thing about modern shoes is that they have come full circle. Today, some footwear is once again trying to make us feel what it was like before shoes existed. Minimalist shoes, barefoot shoes, flexible soles, wide-toe boxes. Designers and researchers have increasingly explored how much artificial structure the human foot actually needs. At the same time, other shoes have gone in the opposite direction. They use carbon fiber plates, advanced foams, engineered meshes, and specialized geometries designed to improve athletic performance. Some modern running shoes are so technologically advanced that they bear almost no resemblance to the footwear of previous centuries. Yet the fundamental problem has not changed. We still have two vulnerable feet, and we still have to put them somewhere. That may be the real reason the history of shoes is so fascinating. The object has changed almost beyond recognition, but the problem remains exactly the same. Protect the foot, help it move, adapt it to the environment, and eventually make it say something about the person wearing it. The first humans who wrapped bark around their feet were not thinking about fashion. The Roman soldier wearing a studded sandal was thinking about marching. The medieval nobleman wearing absurdly long shoes was thinking about status. The factory worker producing thousands of pairs was thinking about efficiency. The athlete wearing specialized sneakers was thinking about performance. And the modern consumer choosing between hundreds of designs may be thinking about all of these things at once. A shoe can be a tool, a machine, a piece of clothing, a status symbol, a cultural artifact, and sometimes a piece of technology. That is the strange journey hidden inside something most of us barely notice. For tens of thousands of years, humans walked barefoot. Then we invented a thin barrier between ourselves and the earth. And from that tiny idea came sandals, boots, heels, sneakers, running shoes, and even footwear designed for another world. So the next time you put on a pair of shoes, remember what you're actually holding. It isn't just something you wear. It is the surviving solution to one of humanity's oldest problems. How do you take a fragile human foot and make it ready for the world? And if you enjoy discovering the hidden history behind the ordinary things around you, stay with Exhibit A, Everyday Objects. Because the next time you look at something as familiar as a shoe, a cup, a chair, or a piece of paper, there may be thousands of years of history hiding in plain sight. Subscribe to Exhibit A, Everyday Objects, and discover the extraordinary stories behind the things we use every day.